Hi, this is Jordan Reed, and you're listening to Ramshackle Glam, the audio blog. My career has never taken what one might call a traditional trajectory, and I have definitely had massive and public failures, and so that is what we're going to talk about today. It is humiliating that many people who know my name think that the most interesting thing about me is the fact that I was once almost on a TV show and then wasn't. If you're a person who was once an actor or a musician or an artist or a writer, anything, creative, in some ways you will always be an ex-actor, ex-musician, ex-writer. That will always be the way that you were introduced at a party. The subtext, of course, being that, of course, you wish you were something other than what you are right now. And so for years, I tried to bend and twist my past into a story that wouldn't make people whisper behind my back once I'd walked away, God, could you even imagine how much that sucks for her? Nobody wants to be the person it sucks to be. But something I have learned over these past many years, mostly because of the extensive writing I've done on Ramshackle Glam and elsewhere, is that if you just keep talking and talking and talking about those moments that you're frightened or embarrassed or ashamed to revisit, one day they start losing their power and become what they always were. Just one more thing that happened in this beautiful, special life that is all your own. This is called The Most Interesting Thing About Me. Alternate title, That Time I Got Fired from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. 6 years ago, around the time that I first started my website, Ramshackle Glam, I wrote about my experience of co-creating and then subsequently being fired from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's a story I've told already, but today I'm going to tell it again for two reasons. The first reason is that the first time I told the story, I wasn't happy with the way I told it. It wasn't, I feel like I could do better, and I'm picky like that. But the second and much more salient reason to me is that the first time I talked about this on my website and elsewhere, I made the story all about me and what happened to me. And I think that was a mistake, because what happened to me is about something much bigger, a truth that's been said ad infinitum, but bears repeating over and over until it becomes fiction. When it comes to career opportunities, gender matters. I have a daughter of my own now, and I want to make sure I get this story right because I want her to know that she should never, ever be silenced by people who make her feel like she's too small to be heard. Her voice matters. She matters. And so do I, even though I didn't always know it. So, here is a little piece of my story, including some parts I left out before and some parts I've only figured out in the years since I first told it. When I graduated from college, I moved out to Los Angeles, where I knew virtually no one except for my ex-boyfriend, Rob. We began dating again, and our relationship quickly grew serious enough that we started planning to move in together and eventually get married. A couple of months after I arrived in LA, Rob conceived of the idea for this Curb Your Enthusiasm style show that centered on a group of 4 actor friends living in Hollywood. And over the next year or so, Rob, myself, and our friends Glenn Howerton and Charlie Day shot 2 pilot episodes for the show, which at the time was called It's Always Sunny on TV. Other friends filled in the remainder of the roles, David Hornsby, Jimmy Simpson, Mary Elizabeth Ellis, who later married Charlie. But mostly it was just the 4 of us. Rob, Glenn, Charlie, and me. I named my character Sweet D as a nod to her optimistic personality, which was originally intended to contrast sharply with the guy's misanthropy. Despite the direct claims of the cast in articles that are published all over the internet, I do assure you that I existed. These articles essentially say that the 3 guys created the show, then they met Caitlin and everything made sense, but no, I was there. I can't help but note that Rob, Glenn, and Charlie used their real names as their character names, while I was given a moniker of Rob's own creation. I also can't help but note that arguably the second most visible female character in the pilot was the waitress, a woman defined not by her identity, but by a job title that she visibly wished wasn't her own. But that's a topic for another day. I have to assume there's some sociology student out there who's written a paper on this already. So back to the filming of those first 2 episodes. It was, oh my God, so much work, but for virtually no pay, of course. But we were unemployed actors with not a whole lot to do in between coffee bean and tea leaf runs and the occasional audition. And our ennui and general idleness became a key element of the show. When only 1 or 2 of us were on camera, the others held boom mics or ran to Rite Aid for more camcorder tapes. We improv'd out most scenes before Rob officially wrote them down. And I remember how exciting it was, not just reading lines from a script that had been that someone else had handed to me, but actually watching these characters emerge out of thin air as we shaped them and they grew. We shot a lot at my West Hollywood apartment because it was nicer, read cleaner, than any of the guys' places. One day I remember Glenn and I were shooting a scene where the 2 of us were sitting on the couch drinking wine and talking about our friend who had just been diagnosed with cancer. Of course, we were drinking real wine because why wouldn't we? And we were going off script and Glenn was just killing it. And I remember having so much damn fun. We were all broke. We were all stressed about where our respective lives and careers were going. But still, I think we all felt like what we were doing was big. I'm not just speaking from the perspective of where the show ended up going. It was even back then, we could feel its potential like a living thing. When we finished shooting the 2 initial episodes, Rob began shopping them around to networks, and a miracle happened. FX offered to shoot a real pilot for the show. And they were going to pay us. What? All of a sudden, we were on an actual set with for real makeup artists and trailers and someone else to hold the boom. Everyone at the network seemed excited, but we still had trouble believing that all of this would actually pan out. We all knew what it was like to get cast in a part, only to end up on the cutting room floor or have the project never see the light of day at all. We knew what it was like to think everything was about to change when really the only thing that was going to happen was that we were about to be drop-kicked back to square one, and we were all sick and tired of that happening. At one point, one of the guys, I'm pretty sure it was Glenn, but I could be wrong, called a meeting in Rob's trailer. No secondary cast members, no execs, just the 4 of us. The question on the table: what if the network wants to pick up some of us, but not all of us? Picking up is when the network approves the casting and you become an official cast member post-pilot. I specifically remember someone, again, I think it was Glenn, saying that I had nothing to worry about because I was, in quotation marks, the pretty girl, not to mention the only girl, and that Rob was clearly fine because he was the showrunner, but he was scared that he and Charlie might be replaceable. And so this is what we did, sitting there in Rob's trailer with paper plates of scrambled eggs from craft services balanced on our laps. We agreed, together, that the network would have to take all 4 of us or none of us. We had been in this thing together for over a year now, and we simply wouldn't allow them to split us up. We shook hands, and we headed back to set. Around that time, my relationship with Rob began to unravel, and I started to sense, at the same time, that I was on increasingly unsteady footing despite our all-for-one pact. One day, I walked into the office that FX had set up for the show and was surprised to find 3 desks. There was one for Rob, there was one for Glenn, and there was one for Charlie. They'd all been made executive producers. Very quickly, almost overnight, I went from feeling, like I was at the center of the project to like I was standing on the periphery looking in. I blamed my age. I was younger than everyone else. I blamed my inexperience. I was less experienced than the 3 guys. I blamed what I saw as my lack of talent. But the fact is, even though at the time I lacked the words or the conviction to say it, that to the people in charge, I was nothing more than another blonde actress. FX at the time was a cigar-smoking, whiskey-drinking old boys club, and I was welcome when I was the girlfriend of the creator. But once I wasn't, my role in creating their new pet project was forgotten. I said nothing, of course, not even to Rob. I was terrified of losing my job, and it seemed to me that the best course of action was to sit down, shut up, and be grateful for what I had. I didn't want to ask why I hadn't been made a producer, why, in fact, I hadn't even known that conversation was happening, because the answer was obvious. Rob Glenn and Charlie, and the agents, managers, and execs that they had started going out for boys' nights with were the guys, the masters of this little universe that they'd created. And me? I was just a girl, and a replaceable one at that. The pilot wrapped, and shortly afterwards, I ended my relationship with Rob. During one of our breakup conversations, he told me in no uncertain terms that if I did not stay in the relationship, I would be off the show. I broke up with him anyway and moved into the house that we had been planning to share all by myself. When FX signed us onto the pilot, one of the first things I did was buy my parents a painting that I'd seen several months earlier and I thought they'd love, of a door hovering in the middle of a massive room. The door is cracked open and you can see the ocean outside running right up to the frame, threatening to spill over. It arrived a couple of days after I was fired. I couldn't afford it anymore, but I also couldn't bring myself to return it. So that painting hangs in their apartment still. I can't tell you how many people have asked me why I didn't just stay in the relationship until the show was picked up and my contract was set in stone. And the answer is very simple. Sleeping in a bed every night alongside a person I was not sure that I wanted to be sleeping with because there was money on the table felt like the worst kind of betrayal. A betrayal both of myself and of my relationship with a man I loved still, despite the fact that we didn't seem able to coexist under the same roof. Basically, I just felt like staying with someone under those kinds of pretenses was a shit thing to do. And besides, I honestly thought he was bluffing. I couldn't even wrap my mind around how a person who'd helped to create a show could end up tossed off of it. It didn't even seem like it could possibly be legal. I remembered the promise we'd made, and I knew Rob, Glenn, and Charlie certainly did too. I trusted them, and I trusted that despite the obvious tension around our breakup, everyone would ultimately do what was right. Because at 23 years old, I still thought that was how things worked. My agent and manager set up a conference call, during which they let me know that while Rob, Glenn, and Charlie had been picked up for the series, I had not been. I got a small payout, the equivalent of one episode's salary, about $17,000. My agent and manager fired me a few weeks later. Rob married the actress who he hired to replace me, Caitlin Olsen, who is lovely and talented and way funnier than I could ever possibly be, and whose work I in no way intend to disparage by making this story public. And I never heard from Glenn or Charlie again. Not since the very day my relationship came to an end. Was I angry? For such a long time. In a panic, I did things I'm not proud of, trying to use my cell phone to record damning conversations, which is a crap thing to do to a person regardless of how you feel about them, in addition to being, I'm pretty sure it's illegal. I tried to make my next relationship into this grand love affair when it very obviously was not, to make it all make sense, like why it hadn't worked out. I became terribly anorexic and tried to starve myself into thin air because maybe if I couldn't feel anything, I couldn't feel the pain of what I had lost, which felt like everything. I considered suing, of course. I made an appointment at a firm specializing in entertainment law, and I sat there in this enormous maple conference room in my very best Banana Republic skirt suit, listening to an attorney tell me that if I took the case, I would be going to court, not only against a person whom I still cared for, but also 3 Arts Entertainment, FX, and the Fox Network. The case, he told me, would be long, and it would be expensive, and no sane casting director would touch me while I was embroiled in it. It was further likely, he told me, that the lawsuit would mean the end of my career as an actress. I would be always known as that girl who sued FX. You'll never work in this town again. I thanked him for his time, and on my way out, I stopped into the lobby bathroom to change into a pair of jeans for my next audition. So, to return to why I'm telling this story now, when I've already told it before on my website, is that years have passed, right? And years during which my life and self have changed in ways I never saw coming and certainly couldn't have imagined as a young ex-actress struggling to figure out what in the world she was supposed to do. And I think this story matters for reasons that I didn't see back then. My friends did wrong by me. I think that's obvious. But I get why they did what they did, and the wrong that was done was bigger than 3 men breaking a promise. I don't blame them for taking advantage of their first big opportunity in a very tough industry. I do, however, blame the social values that created a situation in which a young woman was encouraged by nearly everyone she knew to trade sex and love for money just for a little while, because she had no other real recourse, no other way to ensure that she'd be compensated fairly for her work. This isn't a fun story to tell, although I do think it's an interesting one and a meaningful one. It's a story that makes people, myself included, look not especially honorable, but even beyond that. It's a tricky thing, writing about an incident that so clearly paints me as the sad sack, the bitter ex-actress who could have been a star and then wasn't, and was instead relegated to a footnote in the storied history of a television show. I'm that guy who was almost on Friends instead of Matt LeBlanc. I'm the fifth Beatle. So how do I tell a story like this and not sound pathetic? How do I say the words, I feel good about the decision I made, and have anyone in the world believe me when the other choice would have meant becoming a massively wealthy star of a mega successful show? I don't know if it's possible to convince most people on the planet on this point. There's a hell of a lot of cultural baggage having to do with the value we place on fame and money involved here. But here's the thing. I also don't think I care anymore whether I seem like a sad, failed actress. I'm not an actress. I'm not sad. And I'm also not a failure. I wrote a book and it was published. And then I wrote 9 more and they were published too. I have the 10th and 11th coming out next year. I'm living in the place in the world that I want to live in with the people I want to live with. And yes, of course, it would be nice to have a bunch more money, but I'm good. Great, even with what I've got. I'm happy. And I'm not angry anymore. Not for myself. I am, however, still super pissed on behalf of the 23-year-old girl who felt so unsure of her own footing in this world that she felt it best just to step aside and not rock any boats. She watched her own story get written over and over and over by people with more money and more power than she could ever dream of having, because she thought that if she said anything, she'd be called a liar or crucified for her words. And the worst part is that I'm fairly certain that she was right. Man, do I wish that the person I am now could go back in time and talk to the girl I was. I'd tell her to be brave, to say what she deserved, and to demand it if it wasn't given. I'd tell her that no man, and certainly no television network, is allowed to harm her career because she has decided to stop sleeping with someone. I'd tell her that things were going to look a lot different a few years down the road, and that she needed to keep on talking over and over until her voice was heard. I would tell her to make some noise. I can't tell her those things. That girl I was is many years gone. But I can speak for her now, and I can say the things that she was too scared to give voice to. I can say in no uncertain terms that I was done a disservice. I can say that even though I felt like I deserved to be pushed aside, I did not. I can make sure that I know, way down deep, that even though I might not always have believed it, I matter. And the reasons why have nothing to do with whether or not I once got to be on a goddamn television show. Thank you for listening to my story today. This is Jordan Reed, and you are listening to Ramshackle Glam, the audioblog.